Zarathic stood before the massive viewing window of her warship, watching the distant stars shine like tiny diamonds against the black void of space. Her green scales reflected the pale light from the ship's control panels, and her yellow eyes focused on nothing in particular. She had seen this view countless times over the past 300 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight might be her last hunt. The warrior flexed her clawed hands, feeling the familiar weight of her ceremonial armor. The metal plates had been crafted from the bones of her first kill, polished to a mirror shine that reflected her battle scars. Each mark told a story of conquest, of worlds that had fallen to the might of the Kethver Empire. She was their greatest weapon, their ultimate predator, and she had never failed a mission. Behind her, the bridge hummed with quiet activity. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what they all assumed would be another routine. Conquest! They had done this so many times before. Find a new species, challenge their strongest warrior, defeat them in single combat, and claim their worlds for the Empire. It was the Kethver way, the path that had brought them dominance over 47 different worlds. But something felt wrong this time. Zarathic could not shake the feeling that this hunt would be different from all the others. Commander, her second-in-command, approached with careful steps. Vexstar was young by Kethver standards, barely 50 years old, and he still carried the eager bloodlust of youth. The intelligence reports on the humans are ready for your review. Zarathic turned from the window and took the datapad from his hands. She had already read these reports dozens of times, but she looked through them again anyway. The humans were a new species, recently developed enough to travel between stars. Their technology was primitive compared to the Kethver, but their expansion rate was impressive. In less than 200 years, they had spread to over 30 worlds. They breed like insects, Vexstar said with disgust. Their population grows without control. They consume resources faster than any species we have encountered. Zarathic nodded but said nothing. The reports painted humans as violent and aggressive, constantly fighting wars among themselves, even as they expanded into space. They had nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and showed no restraint in using them against their own kind. To the Kethver Council, they represented exactly the kind of threat that needed to be eliminated quickly. What do we know about their military strength? She asked. Significant, but unorganized, Vexter replied. They have many different governments and military forces. No central command structure. Their ships are fast but lightly armored. They rely on numbers rather than individual strength. This was both good and bad news. A divided enemy was easier to defeat, but humans seem to have a talent for coming together when threatened. The reports mentioned something called the Earth Defense Force, a new organization that was trying to unite all human military units under one command. And their champion? Zarathic asked. Unknown. Our message was sent to their military leaders 3 days ago. They have not yet responded with the name of their chosen warrior. Zarathic found this strange. Most species were quick to name their strongest fighter when challenged. It was a matter of honor and survival. The delay suggested either fear or something else entirely. She walked to her private quarters, leaving Vexstar to oversee the final preparations. Her room was simple and functional, containing only the basic necessities, and her collection of trophies from past conquests, weapons, armor pieces, and ceremonial items from 47 different worlds lined the walls. Each trophy reminded her of a different battle, a different species that had fallen to her claws. The crystalline blade from the Zephyrins, who had fought with energy weapons and personal shields. The bone helmet from the Gorvak massive creatures who relied on brute strength and thick hides. The prayer beads from the peaceful Nalari, who had offered their greatest monk as their champion, believing that spiritual strength could overcome physical power. She had killed them all. Zarathic sat on her sleeping platform and began the ritual preparation that preceded every hunt. She cleaned her claws until they gleamed like polished metal. She checked every piece of her armor for damage or weakness. She reviewed her fighting techniques, running through the movements that had served her so well over the centuries. But as she prepared, doubts crept into her mind like shadows in the corners of her quarters. She was no longer young. 3 years of constant battle had taken their toll on her body and spirit. Her reflexes were still sharp, her strength still formidable, but she could feel the weight of age in her bones. How much longer could she continue as the Empire's ultimate weapon? The communication system in her quarters chimed softly. Commander, we have received a response from the humans. Zarathic returned to the bridge, where Vexter was studying a message on the main display screen. The text was written in Basic, Kethva, though the grammar was awkward and clearly translated by computer. Greetings to the warrior Zarathic of the Kethva Empire. We accept your challenge according to the terms you have provided. Our champion will meet you at the coordinates you specified in 3 standard days. He will come alone and armed only with basic equipment, as is your custom. We ask only that this combat be recorded so that both our peoples may witness the outcome. Signed, Admiral Patricia Hayes, Earth Defense Force. He, Vexter, said with surprise, they are sending a male to fight you. Zarathic studied the message carefully. Most species sent their physically strongest individuals to face her, which usually meant large males. But humans were apparently different. Their males and females seemed to share military duties equally, something that was unusual among the species she had encountered. What do we know about this Admiral Hayes? She asked. Very little. Our intelligence network among the humans is still developing. We know she is a senior military leader, but we have no detailed information about her background or capabilities. Not her, Zarathic corrected. The champion they are sending. This message says he will meet me. Vexter checked his datapad. The name is not provided, only that their champion will arrive at the specified time and location. This was another unusual detail. Most species were proud to announce their champion's name and achievements. The humans seem to be keeping their fighter's identity secret until the last moment. Perhaps they hope to surprise you with an unknown warrior, Vextar suggested. Or maybe they are ashamed of whoever they are sending. Zarathic was not convinced. In her experience, every species had their own approach to ritual combat. Some were purely ceremonial. Others were desperate attempts to save their worlds. But there was always a pattern, a logic that she could understand and use to her advantage. The humans were already breaking that pattern. She spent the remaining 3 days studying everything the Empire knew about human military tactics and technology. Their ships were indeed fast and maneuverable, designed for hit-and-run attacks rather than direct confrontation. Their weapons were crude but effective, relying on explosive projectiles and energy beams rather than the elegant blade work preferred by more civilized species. But it was their history that troubled her most. Humans had been fighting wars continuously for thousands of years. They had experience with every type of combat, from individual duels to massive planetary conflicts. They were adaptable, unpredictable, and apparently fearless when cornered. On the morning of the 3rd day, Zarathic prepared for what might be her final battle. She donned her ceremonial armor with practiced movements, each piece fitting perfectly after centuries of use. She checked her primary weapon, a curved blade that had been forged from the core metal of her home world. She had carried this weapon through every conquest, and it had never failed her. As her ship approached the designated meeting point, a barren moon in neutral space between human and Kethver territory, Zarathic felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and calm that preceded combat. This was what she was born for, what she had been trained for since childhood. Win or lose, she would face this human champion with the full honor of her people. But deep in her heart, she wondered if this time might be different. And that thought scared her more than any enemy she had ever faced. Jake Morrison stood in the cargo bay of the Earth Defense Force ship Stellar Dawn and checked his equipment one final time. His standard-issue sidearm hung at his hip, fully charged and ready. His survival pack contained enough food and water for 3 days, though he doubted the encounter would last that long. Medical supplies, emergency beacons, and basic tools completed his gear. The simplicity of his equipment felt strange compared to the massive warships and advanced weapons surrounding him. But the Kethver challenge had been specific. Single combat between champions, basic weapons only. Winner takes all. If Jake won, the alien empire would leave human space alone. If he lost, Earth and all its colonies would become part of their empire. You sure about this, Commander? Captain Lisa Park asked as she watched him prepare. We could still call for backup. Send a full battle group instead of one person. Jake shook his head. The intelligence reports are clear. The Kethva respect honor above everything else. If we break the rules of their challenge, they might attack all human worlds at once instead of just claiming them. He had volunteered for this mission, despite knowing it was probably suicide. The Kethva warrior Zarathic had conquered 40 worlds over 3 centuries. She was described as the ultimate predator, undefeated in single combat. But someone had to face her, and Jake believed he understood the alien mindset better than most. Remember, Lieutenant Commander Admiral Patricia Hayes spoke through the communication system. This is about more than just winning or losing. We need to learn everything we can about these aliens, how they fight, how they think, what motivates them. That information could save millions of lives. Jake nodded and sealed his helmet. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the barren moon where the challenge would take place. The surface was gray rock and dust, with no atmosphere and no life. Perfect neutral ground for a duel that would determine the fate of entire civilizations. His shuttle landed near a flat area surrounded by low hills. Jake could see another ship in the distance, sleek and dark against the gray landscape. The vessel looked dangerous even when stationary, covered in what appeared to be armor plating and weapon ports. Jake stepped out of his shuttle and activated his suit's external cameras so Earth could record everything that happened. The low gravity made walking easy, but the complete silence felt unnerving after the constant noise of ship engines and life support systems. He walked toward the center of the flat area and waited. According to the challenge terms, both champions would meet at the specified coordinates at exactly the same time. Jake checked his chronometer and saw that he had arrived 2 minutes early. The Kethva ship opened the hatch, and Jake got his first look at his opponent. Zarathic was larger than he had expected, nearly 7 feet tall, and built like a professional athlete. Her green scales caught the light from the distant sun, and her movements had the fluid grace of a natural predator. The armor she wore looked ancient but well-maintained, decorated with symbols that probably represented her victories. But something was wrong. Jake had spent years studying alien body language and behavior patterns. It was part of his job as a first contact specialist. And right now, every instinct he had developed was telling him that this warrior was hurt. She walked with just the slightest favor of her left leg. Her breathing seemed slightly labored, visible through the rise and fall of her chest armor. Most telling of all, she kept her left arm pressed close to her side, as if protecting an injury. Zarathic stopped about 10 feet away from Jake and began speaking in accented but understandable English. "I am Zarathic, champion of the Kethva Empire, conqueror of 47 worlds, keeper of the ancient way. You stand before me as representative of the human species, and by the laws of honorable combat, we shall determine which of our peoples is worthy to rule this sector of space." Jake listened to the formal speech, but his attention was focused on the way she shifted her weight to keep pressure off her left shoulder. Up close, he could see the signs more clearly. Recent scarring on her armor suggested a recent battle. Her yellow eyes, though fierce, showed the kind of fatigue that came from too much fighting and not enough rest. "I am Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force," he replied when she finished. "I accept the terms of this challenge and am prepared to face you in combat." Zarathic nodded and began to draw her weapon, but Jake held up his hand. "Wait," he said, surprising both of them with the interruption. The alien warrior paused, her blade half drawn from its sheath. "You wish to surrender before we begin? That is acceptable, though it means your species will serve the Empire as slaves rather than partners." "No, I don't want to surrender," Jake said, studying her posture more carefully. "I want to know if you're okay." The question hung in the silent vacuum between them like a physical thing. Zarathic's grip on her weapon loosened slightly, and her head tilted in what might have been confusion. "What did you say?" she asked. "Are you hurt?" Jake repeated, pointing to her left shoulder. "That armor has fresh damage, and you're favoring that side. When did you last see a doctor?" For several long seconds, Zarathic said nothing. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Jake could see her processing his words, trying to understand why her opponent would ask such a question. "I do not understand," she finally said. "Why do you care about my condition?" "Because fighting someone who's already injured isn't fair," Jake replied. "When did you last eat? When did you last get a full night's sleep? You look exhausted." Zarathic's confusion deepened. "This is a ritual challenge. Your concern for my welfare is irrelevant to the outcome. Maybe to you, but not to me," Jake said. He sat down on a nearby boulder, much to the alien's amazement. "Look, I know I'm probably going to lose this fight. You've got 3 centuries of experience and you're obviously a skilled warrior. But I'm not going to take advantage of someone who's hurt and tired." The HFY champion stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "You are concerned about taking advantage of me." "Of course I am. What kind of victory would that be?" Jake opened his survival pack and pulled out a medical kit. "Let me take a look at that shoulder injury. We can fight after I patch you up." "This is not how these challenges work," Zarathic said, but Jake noticed she did not move away as he approached. "Maybe not for your people, but it's how they work for mine," Jake replied. "On Earth, we have something called sportsmanship. It means you compete fairly, help your opponent when they need it, and respect each other regardless of who wins." Jake stopped just within arm's reach of the alien warrior, close enough to see the details of her face. Her scales were beautiful, up close, shifting from deep green to lighter shades depending on the angle of the light. Her eyes were intelligent and alert, but also tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "You have fought many battles recently," he observed, noting the way she held herself. "I am always fighting," Zarathic replied. "It is my purpose, my duty to the Empire." "That must be lonely," Jake said quietly. The simple statement seemed to hit the alien warrior harder than any weapon could have. Her yellow eyes widened, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Jake saw something in her expression that he recognized from his own mirror after particularly difficult missions. The look of someone who had been strong for too long. "Lonely," she repeated, as if the word was foreign to her. "When was the last time you had a conversation with someone who wasn't giving you orders or asking you to kill something?" Jake asked. Zarathic opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. She seemed to be searching her memory for something that might not exist. "I fight for the Empire," she said instead. "Personal comfort is irrelevant." "Personal comfort and basic human contact are 2 different things," Jake replied. "Everyone needs someone to talk to, even warriors." He gestured to her injured shoulder. "Will you let me look at that? I'm trained in field medicine. I can't do surgery, but I can clean wounds and apply bandages." The alien warrior looked down at her shoulder, then back at Jake's face. "Why would you help an enemy?" "Because right now, you're not my enemy," Jake said. "You're just someone who's hurt and needs help. We can go back to being enemies after I make sure you're not going to collapse during our fight." Zarathic stood motionless for nearly a full minute, clearly struggling with concepts that had no place in her worldview. Finally, she slowly began to remove the armor plates covering her left shoulder. The injury underneath was worse than Jake had expected. A deep gash ran from her collarbone to her upper arm, partially healed but showing signs of infection. The wound was recent, probably less than a week old, and it had been treated poorly, if at all. "This needs proper medical attention," Jake said, opening his kit and pulling out antiseptic and bandages. "What happened?" "The Gorvac champion on Theta 7 had poisoned claws," Zarathic replied quietly. "I defeated him, but not before he marked me." Jake began cleaning the wound, working as gently as possible. "And after the fight, did anyone treat this? Medical attention is for the weak," Zarathic said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Medical attention is for people who want to stay alive long enough to help others," Jake corrected. "Hold still. This might sting a little." Zarathic sat on the rocky ground of the barren moon, staring at the fresh bandage on her shoulder. The pain that had been her constant companion for the past week was finally starting to fade. The human's medical treatment had been gentle but effective, unlike anything she had experienced in her 3 centuries of service to the Empire. Jake Morrison sat across from her, about 6 feet away, making no move to draw his weapon or continue their scheduled combat. Instead, he was eating something from a small package and had offered to share his food with her. The gesture was so alien to her experience that she did not know how to respond. "You should eat," Jake said, holding out a nutrition bar. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Zarathik wanted to say that warriors did not accept charity from enemies, but the question made her realize how long it had been since she had eaten anything substantial. 3 days! For she had been so focused on preparing for this challenge that she had forgotten to take care of her basic needs. "I do not require sustenance during combat operations," she said, but her stomach chose that moment to make a loud growling sound. Jake smiled, an expression that seemed genuine rather than mocking. "Your stomach disagrees. Come on, it's just a protein bar. Nothing fancy, but it'll give you energy." Against her better judgment, Zarathik accepted the offered food. The taste was strange but not unpleasant, and she found herself eating more quickly than was dignified. Jake watched without comment, then offered her a bottle of water. "The Empire teaches that accepting help from enemies is a sign of weakness," she said after finishing the meal. "The Earth Defense Force teaches that helping people in need is a sign of strength," Jake replied. Different cultures, different values. Zarathik studied the human across from her. He was smaller than most opponents she had faced, built more for speed and intelligence than brute force. His equipment was basic, his weapons simple, but there was something about his presence that she found unsettling. He showed no fear, despite knowing who she was and what she had done. "Tell me about Earth," she said, surprising herself with the request. Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "What would you like to know? Why do you help enemies?" "It makes no tactical sense, because they're not really enemies," Jake said. "They're just people we haven't figured out how to live with yet." He began talking about human history, about wars that had ended in peace treaties, and enemies who had become allies. He told her about the world wars, about conflicts that had seemed impossible to resolve until people decided to try a different approach. He spoke of countries that had fought each other for centuries, but now worked together on projects that benefited everyone. "Humans are not naturally peaceful," Jake admitted. "We've fought plenty of wars, made plenty of mistakes, but we learned that cooperation usually works better than conquest in the long run." Zarathik listened with growing fascination. The concept of former enemies becoming allies was completely foreign to HFY culture. In her experience, there were only 2 types of species: those who served the Empire and those who were destroyed by it. "What about your military?" she asked. "Surely your warriors understand the value of strength and dominance." "We value strength," Jake agreed, "but we define it differently than you do. The strongest person isn't always the one who can win a fight. Sometimes it's the one who can prevent a fight from happening." "That makes no sense," Zarathik said. "Without the ability to enforce your will through combat, you have no power." "Do I have power over you right now?" Jake asked. The question caught her off guard. "You are unarmed and weaker than me. Of course you have no power. Then why are you listening to me? Why did you let me treat your wounds? Why are you eating my food and having this conversation instead of simply killing me and claiming victory?" Zarathik opened her mouth to answer, then realized she did not have a good response. By every rule she had learned, she should have eliminated this human the moment she saw him. Instead, she was sitting on the ground having the longest personal conversation of her adult life. "You confused me with unexpected behavior," she said finally. "Or maybe you wanted someone to show you kindness," Jake suggested gently. "When was the last time someone asked how you were feeling? When was the last time someone offered to help you without wanting something in return?" The questions hit her like physical blows. Zarathik tried to remember a single instance of genuine care or concern from her colleagues, her commanders, or anyone else in the Empire. She found nothing but orders, expectations, and demands for ever greater violence. "The Empire provides everything I need," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Does it?" Jake asked. "You're injured, exhausted, and from what I can tell, you haven't had a real conversation with anyone in months. You've spent 3 centuries fighting other people's battles, conquering worlds for leaders who probably don't even know your name." "They know my name," Zarathik protested. "I am the Empire's greatest weapon. You're not a weapon, Jake said firmly. You're a person with thoughts and feelings and needs just like everyone else. The statement was so radical that Zarathik felt dizzy. She had been trained from childhood to think of herself as a tool of the Empire, valuable only for her ability to kill and conquer. The idea that she might be something more than that was almost impossible to process. I do not understand human thinking, she admitted. That's okay, Jake said. I don't fully understand Kethva thinking either, but maybe that's why we should talk instead of fight. We might learn something from each other. The challenge must be completed, Zarathik said, though she made no move to stand or draw her weapon. The fate of your species depends on the outcome. Does it, though? Jake asked. Who made that rule? Why does every first contact have to end in conquest or submission? What if there was a third option, such as cooperation, trade, cultural exchange, learning from each other instead of trying to dominate each other? Zarathik shook her head. The Empire would never accept such terms. Strength is the only language they understand. But what do you think? Jake pressed. Forget about the Empire for a moment. If you could choose any outcome for this meeting, what would it be? The question forced Zarathik to examine thoughts and feelings she had buried for centuries. What did she want? Not what she was supposed to want, not what would serve the Empire, but what would make her happy. The answer, when it came to her, was both simple and terrifying. I want to stop fighting, she whispered. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession of treason. Zarathik had never spoken those words aloud, had barely allowed herself to think them. But sitting here with this strange human who had shown her more kindness in 1 hour than she had received in decades, the truth felt safe to share. How long have you been fighting? Jake asked gently. 312 years, Zarathik replied. Since I was old enough to hold a weapon. And in all that time, have you ever had a choice? Choices for civilians. Warriors serve. But you're tired, Jake observed. Anyone can see that. You're exhausted, injured, and lonely. That's not weakness. That's just being alive. Zarathik looked at her hands, studying the claws that had taken so many lives. If I stopped fighting, what would I become? It is all I know. You could become whatever you want, Jake said. Teacher, explorer, diplomat, artist. Anything except what other people force you to be. The Empire would never allow it. Then maybe the Empire is wrong. The statement was so treasonous that Zarathik should have killed Jake immediately for speaking it. Instead, she found herself nodding in agreement. I have had these thoughts before, she admitted, but they are dangerous thoughts. Thinking them makes me weak. No, Jake said firmly. Thinking them makes you human. Well, not literally human, but you know what I mean. It makes you a person instead of just a weapon. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the distant stars through the thin atmosphere of the moon. Zarathik felt something she had not experienced in decades. Peace! Not the temporary quiet between battles, but actual inner calm. What happens now? She asked finally. That depends, Jake said. Do you still want to fight me? Zarathik considered the question seriously. The old part of her, the part trained by centuries of conditioning, insisted that she must complete her mission. But a newer part, awakened by this conversation, wanted something different entirely. I do not know, she said honestly. Then, let's figure it out together, Jake replied. For the first time in her long life, Zarathik had found someone who treated her like a person rather than a weapon. The feeling was both wonderful and terrifying, and she had no idea what to do with it. The peace between Jake and Zarathik was broken by the sharp sound of a communication device beeping inside her armor. The alien warrior's expression immediately changed from relaxed to tense, and she stood up quickly, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her healing shoulder. I must answer, she said, her voice returning to the formal tone she had used when they first met. Jake watched as she activated a small device built into her wrist armor. A holographic image appeared above it, showing the head and shoulders of another HFY. This one was larger than Zarathik, with darker scales and scars that spoke of many battles. His yellow eyes were cold and angry. Zarathik, the image spoke in the harsh HFY language. Report your status immediately. Zarathik glanced at Jake, then back at the hologram. General Dexmore, the challenge proceeds according to plan. According to plan, the general's voice rose. Our sensors show you have been sitting idle for over an hour. Why have you not completed your mission? Jake could not understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. Someone was very unhappy with Zarathic's behavior. He watched as she struggled to find an answer that would satisfy her superior. The human champion requested time to prepare. She said finally, I granted this delay to ensure the combat is conducted with proper honor. General Vexmore's eyes narrowed. Honor does not require extended conversation with the enemy. Complete your mission within the next 10 minutes, or I will come down there and finish it myself. The hologram disappeared, leaving Zarathic staring at the empty air where it had been. Jake could see the tension in her posture, the way her claws had extended slightly from her fingers. Whatever peace she had found in their conversation was gone. That was your commander, Jake asked. General Vexmore, Zarathic confirmed. He commands the assault fleet. If I fail to complete this challenge, he has authority to begin a full invasion of human space. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had known the stakes of their meeting, but hearing it stated so bluntly made the situation feel more real. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and they had just spent an hour talking instead of fighting. How many ships does he have? Jake asked. Enough to reduce your colonies to dust within days, Zarathic replied. The Empire does not believe in half measures. She began checking her armor and weapons with quick, efficient movements. The gentle warrior who had shared food and conversation was disappearing, replaced by the deadly champion who had conquered 47 worlds. I am sorry, Jake Morrison, she said without looking at him. You have shown me kindness that I will not forget, but I have my duty, and you have yours. Jake stood up, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. But instead of drawing the weapon, he found himself thinking about everything they had. Disgust! There had to be another way. What if we don't fight? He asked. Zarathic paused in her preparations. What do you mean? What if we refuse to follow the script? What if we tell both our peoples that there's a better way to handle this situation? You do not understand, Zarathic said, shaking her head. The Empire has existed for thousands of years. It has conquered hundreds of worlds. It does not negotiate, it does not compromise, and it does not show mercy to those who defy it. But you're not the Empire, Jake pointed out. You're Zarathic. You have your own thoughts, your own choices. You just told me you want to stop. Fighting what I want is irrelevant, she replied, but Jake could hear the doubt in her voice. Is it you're the Empire's greatest weapon? What happens if that weapon refuses to fire? Zarathic turned to face him fully. Then I am destroyed and replaced with another weapon. Maybe the Empire realizes that someone as experienced and valuable as you might have good reasons for her choices. Before Zarathic could respond, the sound of engines filled the air above them. Both looked up to see a Kefra ship descending toward the moon's surface. It was smaller than the vessel that had brought Zarathic, but it bristled with weapons and moved with predatory grace. Zexmore, Zarathic said, her voice tight with tension. He has come to ensure the mission is completed. The ship landed about 100 meters away from them, its engines kicking up clouds of dust and debris. A ramp extended from its side, and 3 figures emerged. Jake recognized the general from the holographic communication, but the other 2 were new. All 3 wore heavy combat armor and carried weapons that looked far more advanced than anything in Jake's equipment. Champion Zarathic, General Dexmore called out as he approached. You will explain this delay immediately. Jake noticed that the general spoke in English, probably to ensure he understood the conversation. The alien's accent was thicker than Zarathic's, but his words were clear enough. General Zarathic replied formally. I was conducting pre-combat negotiations with the human champion. Negotiations? Vexmore's eyes fixed on Jake with obvious disdain. There is nothing to negotiate. Kill the human and claim this sector for the Empire. With respect, General, the situation may be more complex than our initial intelligence suggested. Vex stepped closer to Zarathic, his posture aggressive. Are you questioning your orders, champion? Jake could see the fear in Zarathic's eyes, though she tried to hide it. This general was clearly someone who did not tolerate disobedience. and she was walking a very dangerous line. I am suggesting that we consider alternative approaches, she said carefully. Alternative approaches. Dexmore laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the barren landscape. You have been corrupted by contact with this inferior species. Perhaps you are no longer fit to serve as the Empire's champion. The general gestured to his two companions, who immediately raised their weapons and pointed them at Zarathic, realized with growing horror that they were prepared to execute her for the crime of showing mercy. Wait, Jake said, stepping forward despite the obvious danger. Don't blame her for my actions. I'm the one who delayed the fight. Dexmore turned, his attention to Jake, studying the human with the same expression someone might use when examining an interesting insect. And why would you do such a thing, knowing it would mean certain death for your species? Jake took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine the fate of millions of people. Because I believe there's a better way for our peoples. To interact in through violence and conquest? Better way, Dexmore repeated mockingly. You think your primitive civilization has something to teach the Kethver Empire? I think every civilization has something to teach every other civilization, Jake replied. Your people are obviously skilled warriors and engineers. My people have learned things about cooperation and diplomacy. Maybe we could help each other. Instead of destroying each other, the general's expression grew even more contemptuous. Cooperation is for the weak. The strong take what they need and destroy what threatens them. Then why hasn't the Empire conquered the entire galaxy? Jake asked. If strength is all that matters, why are there still independent worlds out there? The question seemed to catch Dexmore off guard. For a moment, his confident expression wavered. The Empire expands at its own pace. He said finally, when we already, all worlds will serve us. Or maybe the Empire has limits just like everyone else, Jake suggested. Maybe constant warfare is exhausting, even for the strongest military. Maybe some problems can't be solved with weapons. Dexmore's eyes narrowed dangerously. You dare suggest that the Empire is weak? I suggest that the Empire might be missing opportunities, Jake replied. Zarathic is your greatest warrior, right? She's conquered more worlds than anyone else in your military. What of it? She thinks there might be value in trying something different. Shouldn't that opinion carry some weight? All eyes turned to Zarathic, who had been listening to the exchange with growing tension. Jake could see her struggling with herself, torn between centuries of conditioning and the new ideas he had introduced. Champion Dexmore said coldly, you will complete this mission immediately, or you will be executed for treason and replaced with someone more reliable. Zarathic looked at Jake, then at the general, then at the weapons pointed at her chest. The moment of truth had arrived. She would either follow her orders and kill Jake, or she would make a choice that could change everything. General, she said slowly, I request permission to speak with you privately. Denied. Dexmore snapped. You will kill the human now, or you will die with him. Jake watched as something changed in Zarathic's expression. The uncertainty disappeared, replaced by a calm determination that reminded him of their earlier conversation. She had made her choice. Then I choose to die with him, she said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. General, Dexmore's face contorted with rage, and his guards prepared to fire. But Zarathic was no longer looking at them. She was looking at Jake, and her eyes held something he had not seen there before. Hope. The moment stretched like a wire ready to snap. General Dexmore stood frozen, his face showing complete shock at Zarathic's words. In 300 years of service, no Kethver warrior had ever chosen death over duty. The concept was so alien to their culture that he seemed unable to process what he had just heard. Jake felt his heart pounding as he realized what Zarathic had done. She had just thrown away everything she had ever known to stand beside a human she had met only hours ago. The courage required for such a choice was beyond anything he had ever witnessed. You cannot be serious, Dexmore said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You would choose treason over honor. You would betray everything the Empire has given you. Zarathic stepped closer to Jake, placing herself between him and the raised weapons. The Empire gave me nothing but pain and loneliness. This human showed me something I had forgotten existed. And what is that? The general demanded. Kindness, Zarathic replied simply. The possibility that strength can mean protecting instead of destroying. Dexmoor's shock was quickly being replaced by rage. You have been corrupted by inferior thinking, but your weakness will not be allowed to spread. He raised his own weapon, a device that hummed with deadly energy. Kill them both, he ordered his guards. But as the Kethver soldiers prepared to fire, Zarathic moved with the speed and skill that had made her the Empire's greatest champion. Despite her injured shoulder, she flowed like water, striking the first guard's weapon from his hands and sending him tumbling across the rocky ground. The second guard managed to get off a shot, but Zarathic was already moving. The energy beam passed harmlessly through the space where she had been standing. She reached the second soldier before he could fire again, her claws finding the weak points in his armor with centuries of experience. Jake watched in amazement as the legendary warrior fought not for conquest, but for protection. Every move she made was designed to disable rather than kill, to defend rather than attack. She was still the same deadly fighter, but now she fought for something she believed in rather than something she was ordered to do. General Dexmoor raised his weapon toward Jake, but Zarathic was faster. She tackled the general around the waist, sending both of them crashing to the ground. They rolled across the rocky surface, each trying to gain advantage over the other. "You forget," Zarathic Dexmoor snarled as they struggled. "I trained you. I know all your moves." "Then you should know this one," Zarathic replied, and executed a maneuver that sent the general flying through the low gravity of the moon. Dexmoor landed hard but rolled to his feet with the grace of an experienced fighter. His weapon had been knocked away in the fall, but he drew a curved blade similar to Zarathic's. The two Kethva circled each other like predators, their movements fluid and dangerous. "You were the Empire's greatest weapon," Dexmoor said as they fought. "Now you are nothing but a traitor who will die forgotten." "I was never a weapon," Zarathic replied, parrying his strike and countering with one of her own. "I was a person who forgot she had choices." Their battle was fierce but brief. Dexmoor was skilled and experienced, but Zarathic fought with a purpose she had never felt before. When she finally disarmed him and held her blade to his throat, she was breathing hard but victorious. "Now, what?" Dexmoor asked, his voice filled with bitter contempt. "You cannot fight the entire Empire. More ships will come. More warriors will be sent. Your rebellion ends here." Zarathic looked at Jake, who had been watching the fight with growing hope. "Maybe it does not have to end," she said. "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "The Empire respects strength above all else," Zarathic explained. "If someone defeats their greatest champion in combat, they must listen to that person's terms." Jake understood immediately. "You want me to defeat you officially?" "It is the only way to buy time for negotiation," Zarathic confirmed. "If you win the challenge, the Empire must honor the outcome." "But what about him?" Jake pointed to Dexmoor, who was listening to their conversation with growing alarm. "The general will report what he witnessed," Zarathic said. "He will tell the Empire that their champion was defeated in honorable combat." "I will tell them nothing," Dexmoor spat. "I will not help you legitimize this treason." Zarathic smiled, and Jake was surprised to see genuine warmth in the expression. "You will tell them the truth, General, because the truth is that you were defeated by a warrior who chose to fight for something greater than conquest." She helped Dexmoor to his feet, but kept her weapon ready. "You came here expecting to see the Empire's greatest weapon perform her duty. Instead, you saw a person make a choice. That choice defeated everything you thought you knew about strength and power." Dexmoor said nothing, but Jake could see uncertainty in his eye. The events of the day had challenged every assumption he held about the natural order of things. "The challenge must be completed," Zarathic said, turning back to Jake. "Are you ready?" Jake nodded and drew his sidearm. They walked to the center of the flat area where their original meeting had been interrupted. Both took their positions, weapons ready, but the mood was completely different from what it would have been hours earlier. "For the record," Zek said loudly enough for Dexmoor to hear clearly, "this human showed me mercy when I was wounded. He offered food when I was hungry, and kindness when I was alone. He proved that true strength comes from protecting others, not conquering them." "For the record," Jake replied in the same formal tone, "this warrior chose to defy her orders rather than harm someone she had come to see as a friend. She showed that honor means following your conscience, not following orders." They raised their weapons, but neither fired immediately. Instead, They looked at each other with mutual respect and understanding. "Thank you, Zarathic," said quietly. "Thank you," Jake replied. Zarathic deliberately lowered her weapon and took a step backward. In the formal rules of HFY combat, this constituted surrender. Jake had won the challenge without firing a shot. General Vexmore stared at them both with an expression of complete bewilderment. "This is not how challenges are supposed to end," he said. "Maybe that is why they should end this way more often," Zarathic replied. Jake activated his communication device, sending a signal to both the Earth Defense Force and, using Zarathic's equipment, to the HFY Empire. The message was simple. The challenge had been completed. Humanity had won, and both sides needed to talk. The response from Earth was immediate relief and confusion. The response from the Empire was slower to come, but when it did, Jake could hear the uncertainty in the voices of the HFY leaders. Their greatest champion had been defeated, but not in the way anyone had expected. Over the following hours, as ships from both sides arrived at the moon, Jake and Zarathic worked together to explain what had happened. It was not easy. Many humans wanted to celebrate a military victory, while many HFY wanted to dismiss the result as invalid. But gradually, as more people heard the story, something began to change. Humans started to see the HFY as individuals rather than monsters. HFY began to consider the possibility that there might be alternatives to constant warfare. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the first joint human HFY research station. The facility orbited a neutral star system, staffed by volunteers from both species who were working together to explore the galaxy's mysteries. Zarathic found him there, looking out at the stars. She had traded her ceremonial armor for the simple uniform of a diplomatic liaison, a role she had accepted after formally requesting retirement from military service. "Any regrets?" Jake asked as she joined him at the window. "About giving up conquest for cooperation?" Zarathic considered the question seriously. "None. What about you? Any regrets about showing mercy to an enemy?" "You were never really my enemy," Jake replied. "You were just someone who needed a friend." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching ships from both their species dock at the station. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. But here it was, former enemies working side by side, exploring the universe together instead of fighting over it. "Do you think it will last?" Zarathic asked. "I think it will last as long as people like us are willing to choose friendship over fear," Jake said. Outside the window, the stars shone with the light of infinite possibilities, and two former enemies, turned friends, watched them together, knowing they had helped create something new and better than either of their species had achieved alone.